Some people, they love to work. They love the promotions. They love the bonuses. They love the accolades. But then it becomes a problem. They start to ignore everything else in their life, their health, their marriage, their kids, until you wake up and ask, what the heck just happened? And while we know that this is a bad trade-off, so many of us still worship at the altar of work. Why is that? In this episode of the Examine Life podcast, I speak with the financial services executive, Manisha Thakor, who also wrote the book, MoneyZen. Manisha is a workaholic and was forced to step off the hamster wheel because of a near-death experience. She came to realize that her drive for money and validation came from unhealed childhood wounds. This helped her figure out what enough money was for her so that she could slow down and build a happy life without chasing achievement. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to another episode of the Examine Life podcast, where we take some of life's thorniest questions and deconstruct them in a way that is both pragmatic and philosophical so that you can lead a more productive, examined, and joyful life. Today, we have a very, very special guest to tackle a question that is near and dear to so many of our hearts, myself included. And the question is, how to separate your self-worth from your net worth? This is a spicy one, and my guest is Manisha Thakor. How's it going?
Khe, it's so good to be here with you because that's one of my favorite questions too.
All right. Well, we're going to dig in. Like I was telling you before, we've got some Enneagram 3s, some achiever types, some people that they want to get off. They want to find enough. As you said, they want to leave the cult of never enough, but they're struggling. So before we jump in, though, Manisha, tell our listeners a little bit about you.
So I am 53 years old. I spent my entire career in financial services. I spent the first 15 years on the institutional side of business as a buy-side equity analyst and then portfolio manager overseeing corporations, endowment, foundation, pension plans primarily. And then I happened to write 2 books on personal finance for young women in their 20s and 30s because my dear girlfriend from Harvard Business School and I discovered that our Harvard Business School girlfriends were asking us really basic questions because they had gone into management consulting or operations or marketing, and they don't teach personal finance in business school. They teach corporate finance in business school. And so those 2 books caused me to flip gears, and I spent the next 15 years of my career working on the retail side with a very heavy emphasis on women and wealth. But what I ultimately came to discover was that I feel like when it comes to money, it's not so much your biological gender as it is your psychological gender. And I am very much a guy when it comes to how I think about money. And I realized as such that I had spent my entire adult life as a human doing instead of a human being. And I wanted to figure out how that happened and how I could get out of that conundrum.
Oh, beautiful. Well, you're going to help a lot of people with this conversation, and you are with your book, which is called MoneyZen. And we'll put the links in the notes, but everyone go check out the book. It's awesome. I devoured it in one plane ride. So before we jump into our question, I just want to point our listeners to a place where you can discuss what is enough, or we can all leave the cult of never enough through our cohort-based coaching programs. So check out radreads.co/coaching if you want to leave the cult of never enough. All right, let's get into the main event. How to separate self-worth from net worth. But before we jump into that question, there is a quote that shook me to my core while I was reading your book that said, workaholism or work is the addiction of choice for the unworthy. Can you unpack that for us?
Oh, yes. So everybody's path to, quote, feeling unworthy is different. I have observed, particularly in researching this book, that the feeling of unworthiness is one that seems exceptionally prevalent amongst high achievers. And we don't wear a flashing badge on our forehead saying, I am crazy driven because I don't feel confidence in my self-worth. And what is fascinating to me is how so many of us came to this place. The dominant driver is what I call small t traumas, things that happened to us prior to the age of 25 when our brains were fully formed. And typically they imprinted upon us a protective set of activities that, when carried through into our adult lives, result in runaway traits. So that sounded very sterile. Let me give you an example. I'm mixed race, and I grew up in a small town in Indiana where no one was mixed race. And I was chubby back then, and I had psoriasis, which is a skin condition that results in patchy places where you don't want people to see them. And, the kids called me things like cow butt and thunder thighs when I was in 4th, 5th, 6th grade. And it was enormously painful, as any form of bullying is. And I felt very excluded, except in the classroom where I got good grades and praise from my teachers.
Yeah.
And so I focused heavily on that activity. And then when you get into the work world, what replaces praise from teachers and good grades? It's promotions and money. And so behavior that once served me as a protective source in a difficult time basically came to drive my behavior in a very toxic manner. And what I learned in writing the book is sometimes the trauma is as simple as a certain sentence that a parent says to you, or a set of unspoken expectations, or a feeling you have around the accomplishments of a sibling versus yourself. So there's a wide array, but we often feel embarrassed thinking about the small t traumas because we think, gosh darn it, I'm super successful. How could that thing that happened back then still be hurting me?
I can relate to that in so many ways. So also mixed race, child of immigrants. I grew up in New York City, and there were just these little things where, when I was in middle school, people would say, you walk like a girl, right? Because I had this like a strange gait. I was really skinny. So the opposite, I was very skinny. So people say we can't see your shoulders, things like that. And I think many of our listeners, I think this small t, big T trauma, I know that I struggled with this because I think of the word, I actually feel very uncomfortable with the word trauma because I think of someone who has been abused or, just like horrific types of abuse.
Yeah.
And so when someone says, and I'm, I was a lower middle class kid. So like Maslow's hierarchy, basic needs, fully covered. So no issue of that. And there's I don't know if shame's the right word, but there is this kind of discomfort that I feel to say like, hey, I had trauma. And I know there's the distinction of small teen trauma, but like because someone said it, you walk like a girl, that's going to drive this kind of maniacal search for praise and rewards and recognition and all that. But could you say more? Like, what do you say to the person? Because I know many of these listeners are kind of middle class kids, a lot of kids of immigrants. And there's like, we had it good. And so they almost feel embarrassed to even use that calling card of like, someone made fun of me. Oh, boo hoo hoo. Now I'm this like crazy overachiever that makes me make all this money. Like, how do you help people bridge that gap?
I think that is, no pun intended, the key to the solution.
Yep.
And it's very difficult to acknowledge the word shame. But that is exactly what we are feeling and resisting articulating, because in our new world and our level of accomplishments, we feel like that should not exist. So we feel shame and embarrassment about it. But the only way to get over it is to go back through it. And that may sound hokey, but it is the activity of examining and unpacking what it was that happened to you. And again, I want to emphasize, it can be something so small. One woman told me she was with her father and her brother. They had a fancy new camera, back 20 years ago, where you had to really play around with the lenses and so forth. And she was told by her father, oh, you don't need to know this, you're a girl. Well, she went on to get an MBA and an MD, and now she's founded like 2 entrepreneurial companies, and she's driven by that, oh, you don't need to know this, you're a girl. So what I encourage people to do is not go to therapy. And that's part of the reason I wrote the book, was to help people see examples in which they may see themselves. Yeah. And the most important thing is to understand the resulting compensatory behavior that you picked up, and to ask, is it still serving you? Is it still protecting you? And when you ask the question that way, it's not full of shame. It's full of, okay, I just launched a product line that went nowhere. Let me examine that and figure out what to do differently. No different than that.
Are you familiar? It's interesting to hear you say, it's not, therapy. Obviously, your book's not therapy, but I hear a lot of and I've never done this modality of therapy, but I've read and observed a lot of it, of internal family systems, IFS. And so IFS, it seems like some of the things that you're discussing is that kind of IFS. For those who are unfamiliar, I'm going to really paraphrase it, but you basically have these different parts, which is like the protector and the taskmaster and the inner critic. And they came about in childhood, and they were there to protect you. So when someone said, oh, you don't deserve that, the taskmaster said, let me show them, and then the taskmaster stops serving you. The powerful thing that I found about IFS, again, just from reading about it, is that there is this, it almost transcends the ability to use words, where, you say like, well, talk to, ask yourself, is this behavior still serving you? And you're like, I know so many people like, I know this behavior doesn't serve me, but I still need to make this fear and all that. And so I wonder, in your research, like, how did you mentioned kind of asking yourself, does this behavior still serve me? What else did you learn about the ways in which, because I think people listening to this, they want to change.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of people that don't even care to change. They're just like, this is how I'm wired. I want to play the money game. The people listening to this want to change, but they can't.
Yeah. I'll address both parts, the latter first. I knew I was a workaholic. My marriage fell apart because I was a workaholic. I lost the bulk of my friends over time because I was a workaholic. I had 2 near-death health experiences because I was a workaholic, and I still couldn't stop. IFS, interestingly, as I was doing my research and talking to various different multidisciplinary experts, was something that was recommended to me on multiple occasions. And so in my case, the process of writing the book ended up being in a bit a form of IFS. Had I not gone through that, I'm not sure that I would have the insight. I will also say that I am bipolar 2, and part of and I wasn't diagnosed until well into my 40s. Part of the reason is because when you are in hypomania, which differs from full-out mania when you're bipolar 1, I would work around the clock. And in finance, that's called being a great employee. And so it was, I was not diagnosed with that. Instead, I ended up being in a lot of therapy, which didn't help at all because my problem was chemical. So that's why I feel like therapy does not help those of us who are really action-oriented in quite the same way that IFF does.
Got it. One interesting thing for me, and I'm not a huge advocate of it because I've only done it once, but was guided psychedelics.
Yeah.
And in that process, I've shared this in another episode, I was shaking and, blindfolded, like I had a mask on. There was a therapist next to me. And
Was this
I was
ayahuasca?
shaking. This was MDMA and psilocybin.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm working my way up to ayahuasca. And I was shaking and shaking and shaking. And all I kept saying was, I just want to be a good boy. I just want to be a good boy. And that was that kid in me coming out. And my parents, like, they never hid me or, like, my parents are awesome. But it was very much, I think, what I saw in that experience. And I write about this. I've been writing about this on my blog for a decade now. So this has been my form of therapy too, is just writing about it, going into the wounds and sharing them publicly and engaging with others about it. But what maybe similar to the camera example you gave was, for me, it was, I had a belief in conditional love, meaning that, like, love for me was only conditional upon me acting a certain way. And I suspect that many children of immigrants feel that because they're like, be a lawyer, and then you decide to be an artist, and they're like, what are we going to tell your aunties?
Right.
And so for me, it has been kind of wrestling with this kind of conditional self-acceptance of sorts, and then also just the shame of otherness of you walk like a girl, you're skinny, you're this, you're that. Can I ask you? So you started to have this very successful career. What was the first instance where you said to yourself, this might not be the right playbook? Like, when did you see cracks in the chase, in the game of chasing money?
It was, sadly, honestly, not until I was approaching my 50th birthday. For the decades ahead of that, there were plenty of cracks. I just chose not to see them or to fill them with grout. And so, some of the things that could have told me, for example, in my institutional side of my life, I probably traveled 40 weeks a year. And I would get home from the airport and I would go straight to the office and I'd work till like 2 a.m. after getting off a plane from flying cross country and having done, anywhere from 3 to 5 meetings that day. And then I'd go home and shower and I would be back in the office. Like, that is not normal behavior.
Yeah.
There are also smaller things. I can remember walking through the kitchen in one of the offices I worked in, and a staff assistant was in front of me, and she said, without turning around, I know that's you, Manisha, because you are the only person in this office, and there are 150 people, who walks that fast. I mean, like, little things like that. And instead of cracks, I viewed them as badges of honor. I'm important. I'm busy. I've got a lot to do. Get out of my way.
Yeah. Wow. And so what happened? You said at 50 was the big reveal, or the crack that brought all the other cracks out. What happened at 50?
It's a 2-part story. It started in my early 40s when I was still married. My ex-husband and I had gone on a motorcycle trip to Laos. And in motorcycle parlance, I was riding 2 up on his off-road motorcycle. Now, mind you, I wasn't looking at anything because I had in earbuds and I was listening to business books the entire time we were going through this amazing jungle experience. So
on the back of what 2 up? That's the back of the motorcycle.
Exactly.
Okay. So anyway, you're in Laos with your husband in your 40s, and you're listening to business podcasts.
You're in the middle of the jungle, Khe. Like, I am not kidding. We wanted to go in and see where so much of the carnage from the Vietnam War had occurred that was not ever discussed. And yeah, that's what I was doing.
Oh my
On
God.
the last
Okay.
day, we were back in Capital City, and I decided I needed to go out and work with my laptop. I applied bug spray, which I was adamant about when we were in the jungle. But I was working a lot, sweated off. I didn't reapply. Mosquitoes love to be where humans are, and I happened to get bit by a mosquito and get dengue fever. And for most people, dengue fever is called breakbone fever. It's incredibly painful, but it's a virus. And for most people with hydration and rest, they get over it. But for a small group of people, they have severe complications that can lead to organ failure. And I was one of those lucky people. And I can remember vividly being in the emergency room when I got back to the U.S. and the doctor basically saying, it's time to call your family in. And it's true. I remember shaking. I was under all these heated blankets, but I was so cold, my teeth were chattering like a cartoon character. And I remember thinking, holy crap, my mom, my dad, my brother, my ex-husband were all in the room. And I thought, it's true. It's true that you don't think I want to work more on my, at the point of literally nearing dying. Then 10 days...
They called it, they thought you were on your deathbed.
Yes, literally. And so
Wow.
my family flew in from the East Coast. I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico at that time. And within 10 days, I'd started to perk up. And I had my right hand come to my hospital room so we could start setting my agenda of how I was going to rejigger things to keep working while convalescing. So I didn't learn that time. And
can I just pause you there?
Yeah, sure.
That's the regrets of the dying, right? It's like one of them is I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And so you felt that, because deeply. Okay. And then a week later or whatever, a couple of days later, your chief of staff's setting up command central in the hospital, like a laptop and speakers or whatever.
Yeah, it lasted 10 days. 10 days.
When you think back on that, that's a near-death experience. That's as close as you get to a near-death experience. Yeah. What was going, did you know, when it faded, that I'm close to dying moment?
Yeah, as soon as I had enough energy to start thinking about work. During those 10 days, I was in so much pain and there was so much uncertainty about how some of my vital organs were going to respond. But as soon as I had the energy to sit up in the hospital bed and start talking without being on morphine, I just snapped back into the habit. And I remember I was just starting my own wealth management practice at this time, thinking, I have employees, I have clients, I have to do this. And my business is at a tipping point where I really could massively grow this if I just keep going. I can't stop.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. It's so relatable. I know that I can be ill or hungover, like when I had COVID and, you're knocked out for a day. And the minute you get that little burst of energy back, it's I think for people like you and I and others listening, it's easier to work than to not by 10x. It's so much easier to work than to not work, and something we should talk about. But I take us to or go ahead.
Well, no, and that's exactly what happened with the second illness. I came down with Epstein-Barr, which is like mono on steroids. And, for the average person who gets it, it's not pleasant. At its extreme point, oftentimes you're able to stay awake 5 or 6 hours a day. But because my organs had been severely compromised by the dengue fever, my body experienced levels of inflammation that were so high they were consistent with malignancy or tumor, yet every test showed there was nothing malignant or tumorous in my body. My body was simply, my autoimmune system, my body was literally attacking itself. And as a
No.
result, I had to take a leave of absence from work that I thought was going to be 3 months, and it ended up being 9, because I literally could not stay awake longer than 5 or 6 hours a day.
For 9 months.
And so for 9 months, I'm on bed rest, essentially, and I could not work. And I was forced to experience, number one, what it's like not to work. 2, one day I was lying on my sofa and I happened to look up and my eye caught an image that I showed you before we started working, which was something Carl Richards drew me, and it represented values that I had listed 30 years before after spending time studying abroad. And those values were simplicity, small joys, and financial independence. And I realized what had happened to me was that in seeking financial independence, which had grown much more than just independence, that was, as we started off, my entire self-worth, I completely lost small joys and simplicity in my life. And I had time during those 9 months, forced time, to question whether I wanted to spend the next half of my existence on Earth, and maybe less than the same amount of time that I'd already spent, behaving in the same manner over and over and over again because I couldn't get out of bed.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. It's so helpful for me to hear, because I had the JV version of that, but like teeth grind, like I have no enamels left in my teeth, just like hardcore teeth grinding since I was 13 years old, just from the pressure, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, borderline alcoholism. So it's just, people they just see you on the outside and they're like, oh, this person's crushing it. This person, so many accolades, so much this and that. And they're broken on the inside, physically broken. And I'm thank you for sharing that, because I think more people need to hear that, because I think that they too, many people listening are like, I'm broken on the inside, but on the outside, I have this, I can carry myself in a way that is so validated by society. And you brought up this interesting point where it's like workaholism, success addiction, Arthur Brooks calls it, pick your favorite terminology for it. But it's the one ism, right? Alcoholism, workaholism, different isms. It's the one that society celebrates. Right? To millennials' credit, you and I are both Gen X's. To millennials' credits, they kind of are like, you guys got it all wrong. Like, these badges of honor of taking red eyes and going straight to the office or sleeping 6 hours. And I mean, we're from the generation where 5 or 6 hours, I slept 6 hours a night for 20 years.
Right.
And it was just like, it's normal. That was just normal. I still joke to people sometimes that a 60-hour work week is like a piece of cake. Talk to me at 80 and 100. That's when we're really talking. And kudos to the millennials listening to this. They took a stand. They're like, guys, gut check yourselves. What are you doing? But when you go back to the self-worth and net worth, I think that, how do you deal with, look, we're social beings. We want to be seen. We want to be celebrated. We want to be heard. We want to be visible. And there's no easier with air quotes, in the United States to be visible by saying, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a CEO. I'm an exited founder. I'm an MD. I'm a partner at a law firm. How do you kind of separate that, whether it's prestige or that need to be seen? Again, when you tie that back to this kind of these kids who were unseen and othered when they were young, how do you kind of like basically get off the prestige recognition treadmill?
Oh my, it's a multi-step process. And part of the reason I wrote this book was I realized I felt no matter how much money I earned, no matter how many accomplishments I achieved, no matter how much praise I received, it was never enough. And as I was in my 9 months of bed rest, realizing that that was a key thing that was driving me, the need for money, the need for accomplishments, the need for praise. And that led me to start reading a number and then talking to academic experts in workaholism and the role of career in our life. Derek Thompson in The Atlantic, I love. He writes some wonderful stuff about this topic. And one of the things that really struck me was his analysis of how on earth we move from work being a job to a career to a calling. And I think what I needed to do was reevaluate, should work be a calling? Can you have what is called healthy work engagement, where you enjoy your work, but then you disconnect when you are not working? And that is only possible when you are looking at your own character and worth as a human and adding in other human dimensions, because as you said, we are social beings. And so in my case, it happened to start with, I don't have children, which again was a deliberate business decision, because back when you and I were in the early stages of our career, if you wanted to be a woman in finance, no quicker way to not become the managing director than to have kids. Thank goodness that's changed. But it was examining my relationship with my 2 young nephews and my niece and observing their just joyful nature full of play and my sheer bliss in being around them. That was my very first toe in the water of thinking, really, what do I want my character to be based on? And up until then, I just felt such pride that I was running around with a busy badge and that my character was based on work, prestige, and income.
Yeah. I love the story where it's your nephew or your niece that says, "Hey, Auntie, can we FaceTime right now?" And you said, "I have a call right now." And then your nephew says, "I'm not always going to want to FaceTime with you."
It was a huge slap in the face. Like, wait, kids get to a point where they don't like adults.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to that work as a calling. Are you familiar? I don't think I saw it in the book. There's a philosopher by the name of Byung-Chun Hall. I might be butchering his name. He's a Korean philosopher who's German, so educated and lives in Germany. And he's written a lot of little books, but one of them is called The Burnout Society. We'll put it in the show notes. But he has this argument. He's a deep philosopher, and I'm not great at reading philosophy. But he basically says we used to be in a society where it was a prohibition society, or he called it the obedience society, where you can't do this. So if you're a peasant, you're a farmer, you can't be an owner. You're always going to be a farmer. You can't drink alcohol. You can't, have this type of sexual relations. Like it was just this, you can't. And we have moved away from a prohibition society to, I forget the term he uses, where it's like, you can do everything. And so you can, not only can you be a farmer, you can also be the owner of the entire commons, right? And so he's like, so you think that you're free by escaping the bondage of prohibition, but you're actually less free because Ken is so open-ended that you become this, he calls it DIY entrepreneurs of the self. Right. And then it breeds narcissism, and it's just this really powerful framing where he said we move from the obedient self to the achievement self. But the achievement self, the way it's constructed is that it's never enough.
Wow.
Because there's always more achievement. And then he ties it to neoliberalism and, the commodification of skills and so on. But I think you and our listeners would really enjoy it. So we'll drop it. We'll drop it in the notes. But okay, I want to ask you, so you're a financial advisor and you understand money, you've written books on personal finance. What's your take on the magic number, the retirement number? There's this famous line from Succession where it's like $5 million, where it's like it's like the ugliest house on a pretty block. You have enough money not to work, but you still need to work. So some quote like that.
Right.
But everyone listening, myself included, has a number. 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, 100 million. Many of them have eclipsed their numbers. And so where do you, as someone who probably had their own number, but also advised others on the number, where do you land on this belief that there's one number where poof, unicorns start flying, rainbows, gold starts descending from the sky, and everything is resolved once you hit that one number? Where do you come out from that? Both, and I'm so curious as a financial advisor and as someone who has kind of re-engineered and reevaluated the traditional playbook.
So I came up with my number when I was in business school. It was my FU number where I wouldn't have to work unless I wanted to. I was very committed to hitting this number. The number kept inching up, and I convinced myself that's because I needed to inflation adjust it. But really, it just kept inching up because that's how the human
mind... Like 3% inching up, or like 20% inching up?
Well, closer to 20 than 3%. And I ultimately hit the number.
Even with the moving?
Even with the moving. And what I found was I still wanted more. And what's interesting is I drive a 12-year-old Mini Cooper. I'm wearing a sweater that I got off Poshmark, which for the guys on the show happens to be a resale site for upscale clothing. And I'm not fancy in that way.
Yeah.
I ask myself, why did it not feel like it was enough? I don't fully have an answer to that, other than there's a variety of factors that I talk about in the book that lead to this. But my aha, when I realized I have enough, I've run the number 6 ways to sideways. I've been doing that for decades. In financial advisor parlance, there's something called a Monte Carlo that you can use to identify at what point you will be able to live off your portfolio under various different scenarios, under these kind of investment returns, under this kind of inflation rate, play around with how much you withdraw. And I realized I could spend twice as much as I was spending, not because the number was that big, but because I live reasonably frugally, which I attribute to being an immigrant or, second generation. But I was in a prospect meeting where the prospect did not feel comfortable sharing her finances. And I was at a very forward-thinking firm at the time. And they had a process, which we now call financial life planning, where we would sit down with a prospect for 2 hours and we would walk through all the human elements of how they earned that money, how they wanted to use that money, what legacy they might want that money to support. And as I was answering the questions that I had asked clients a bajillion times, tears started streaming down my face because I realized I had so far eclipsed the financial enough for me And yet I was emotionally bankrupt. And that was the big aha for me, was realizing the human costs of hitting this number that, no, I'm never going to be flying around in private planes, and I'm not going to be driving the most expensive Tesla. That's not my enough. I'm not at that enough level. But if I want to enjoy the things that are most important to me, like buying the now $7 latte and sitting in a coffee house and reading a book and listening to jazz in the background, or spending time with my nephews and niece who still like adults. I only have a few more years left of that, I think. Those things don't cost that much. Now, there are other things I do like that do cost a lot. So I'm not saying don't spend nice money on, don't spend money on nice things. But it was reconnecting joy with my expenditure of money that really helped me get back to a healthy understanding of what is enough for me.
I love that. I love that. Do you, with your clients, do you, when they say like, my number is 10 million, what if I came to you and said, my number is 10 million and, you know, it's 10 years away from that? How do you respond to kind of a client that is very anchored to the number? How do you coach them, or what's the next step with that?
So the next step is to explore why that is the number. So to sit and say, okay, let's take a look at this number. What does that mean in terms of your lifestyle? What will you be able to afford to spend a year at that lifestyle, at that stage of assets? Will you need to continue to work? Do you want to continue to work? What does this picture mean for you financially? And what will you have to sacrifice, or what will you have to do that does not bring you joy? What will you have to do that feels stressful to you in order to make those numbers work? For some people, it works. For other people, they look at that and they're like, wait a minute. My partner, Jay, is an amazing human being. He's so philosophical and brilliant, and makes me laugh and think every single day. But he's 58, and his attitude towards work has always been, it's something you do in order to live. It's not your identity. And his number is a fraction of my number, because the things that he likes to do cost a fraction of what a lot of people want to do. Yep. And as a result, at 58, if he wants, he could retire at a level of income that most people would be like, seriously?
Sure.
At that level, you know, you qualify for ACA credits, you know, and it's watching him has really also helped me reevaluate what is important, because he's still flipping happy.
It's funny that one of our guests, Kevin Dahlstrom, he, you know, very similar stories, and he's a rock climber, mountain climber. And so he goes there, and it's just, no one cares that he's a, you know, 8-figure guy, whatever, you know, it just, they couldn't, it doesn't even register in their plane of words. Like,
right.
It's just, we're here to climb this mountain. Can you climb it? Can you not climb it? End the story. Like, that's the only thing. So his advice was to just, you know, I think that what you're saying, or what I'm hearing is,
if you're always around finance people, if you're always around people who work at Google and Facebook, if you're always around entrepreneurs that are trying to exit, you're gonna have a very distorted view of your enoughness just by osmosis, right? And it's very hard to unwire that because we're social comparing creatures.
And the comparison has now gone 360.
Yeah.
So the comparison is our peer group, and oftentimes our peer group are the people we work with, and they become our friends because we're working all the time.
Mm.
And then, of course, we all know social media, where you put stuff up and the best of your life curated. But now the images that we see in media are also financially unrealistic. And this is a huge one where I ran the numbers on some core frontline jobs. Let's just say a police person, a fire person, a physician's assistant, a staff assistant. And I looked at the clothes they wore, the cars they drive, the homes they're portrayed in as living in. And what I found is when I added up the costs, they would have to earn 30 to 50% more to live, groom, entertain the way we're seeing on TV. And this is at all income levels of jobs.
Yeah.
And as a result, we are comparing ourselves to what I call financial funny mirrors. And so when you stir up all of that and then you sprinkle easy access to debt, man, that's a dangerous combination for being stuck in the cycle of comparison.
Yeah. That example blew my mind. Where what TV show was it? You had the assistant.
I picked Suits because I've long been obsessed with the royal family, and so with Meghan Markle's in it, and so
yeah. But for listeners, I'll paraphrase it. But there's a character in Suits, an assistant, I think, or
Donna.
Donna's the assistant, and Donna looks to the T's and blowouts and like nice suits. And Manisha in the book tries to reverse engineer, like if she got a manicure, this and the blowout and this suit and this bag and all that. And the number, it was like X orders greater than the income that she was making. So media, that's even traditional media.
Right.
Where, at least there's some guardrails in traditional media, like social media is completely unhinged in that regard. I wanted to ask you spoke to Vicki Robin from the FIRE movement. And just briefly for our listeners, the FIRE movement, most of you have heard of it, is financial independence, retire early. It's all about the numbers, SW single withdrawal rates, and really like heavy delayed gratification. But Vicki Robin is kind of this unsung folk hero, lives in a commune in Seattle.
Yep,
I think.
Blue Island.
And I think she never really wanted to be the leader of the FIRE movement, but just wrote this book called Your Money or Your Life that got picked up by the movement. And I'm curious, so you speak to this woman who has inspired this movement. I think it hits on a lot of the things that we are struggling with that we've talked about in this conversation. I don't think it's bad. I don't want to say it's bad, but I think there's a lot of unhealthy elements to the FIRE movement of delaying gratification, extreme frugality, believing that this one number is going to provide you this salvation, let you know yourself, answer these questions. But anyway, I could go on about that. But this woman becomes this leader of this movement accidentally. And so you spoke to her. What did she say? What was she like?
Well, first of all, let me just tell you that I read the book in the year it came out in 1992. I just graduated from college. And it's probably the financial book that has most influenced my life, although I haven't always paid attention to the core message. The idea of having enough money to not have to work, to hit what she calls in the book the crossover point, where you don't have to work unless you want to work. She and the original author, Joe Dominguez, who's since passed, I got to know Vicki when the second edition of the book came out in 2018. We spoke on a variety of different panels together. And what she told me was that the point of the book was that you were living lightly on the planet. The quote, frugality was about not buying stuff that you didn't need because that stuff had a cost on the planet. And it also had a cost on your time, that an opportunity cost on your time that could be spent giving back to the broader community. The point was to simultaneously lower the cost of your needs while you were putting money aside, investing, and helping to build that nest egg. It was not to grow that nest egg as big as possible so that you could buy as much stuff to destroy the planet and lose all of your relationships. And so, she mentioned that she went to several different FIRE conferences and met people, and that they were lovely people, but that she was worried that it had now become a competition. Who could save the most? Who could be the most frugal and extract joy from a period in life where you're healthy, hopefully, and vibrant. And that was not ever the purpose of the book.
Yeah. And there was this quote that I just pulled up here. She said, your friends and family and your love of things have nothing to do with money or your biggest treasures.
Right.
And I love that. And it just shows how, maybe it's just my cynicism of, Western capitalism, but you can kind of just take this very spiritual, she probably wouldn't like me using the word folksy, but it comes across as...
She would.
Okay. So this folksy idea, and it becomes this, chest puffing, Reddit threading world of this like singular obsession with this one number. And it's just, and I can knock it, but I've just done my own version of that. I am the doctor who smokes in that regard. I think it's so cool that you got to speak with her, because her book was very influential to me, and then now I have this kind of adjacent complex relationship with FIRE that we won't get into on this podcast. But
I do want to say everybody credits her with being the grandmother of FIRE, and I think Vicki would say that's not the FIRE I wanted to be the grandmother of.
Yeah. Wow. And so you in that chapter you talk about there's financial well-being. So we talked about the number and investing and all that stuff, which everyone listening is A plus on that. Guys and gals, you're A plus on that. But there's this other piece, emotional wellness. And what does that look like for, again, let's go back to one of our, startup heavy people waiting for that next exit, delaying, but just, disconnected from themselves. And what is the road back to emotional wellness, connecting money with joy, connection with other humans? How do you start now instead of waiting for that imaginary exit or that imaginary milestone that's just going to move once you get there?
It's not easy. When I recognized that I needed to change, I started thinking, what do I like to do for fun? And I couldn't think of anything. Work? That was my initial answer. And then, people say, well, go back to your childhood and think about some of the things that you liked to do then. But most of us have become so disconnected from those things, which down the road in investing in our emotional wealth, many of us come back to. I have. My mom told me I'd regret quitting piano when I was in high school, and she's absolutely right. I'm now taking up piano again, and
Awesome.
I'm taking up Spanish, which I was obsessed with in high school because I wanted to get good grades in it. Now, because I enjoy speaking it. But initially, I had to use the advice of one of the women I interviewed in the book, who has a philosophy that connection creates balance. And when you feel discombobulated, the question to ask yourself is, to whom or what in this moment do I need to be connected to move ever so slightly, incrementally, towards feeling happier? And what I found in the beginning was maybe it was 15 minutes of allowing myself to read the latest gossip on the royal family, or today I'm obsessed with Travis and Taylor. And so, but eventually it started to grow into broader areas as I started to put value on connection. And then the next thing was to put value on curiosity. And for me, one of the tools that help do that is a book called The Artist's Way at Work. And that really helped me. There's a variety of tools, but the three core ones in the book are doing 3 pages of stream of conscious writing first thing in the morning. Like literally, you do not censor yourself. You just write down whatever's in your mind. And if nothing's in your mind, you write nothing's in my mind, nothing's in my mind until something pops in your mind. And when you're done, you tear them up. You don't go back and read them or analyze them. I found that after doing that, ideas would start to bubble up for me. And combined with Vicky's second tool, which is to go on a date with yourself once a week for a half hour and go do something that you've never done before.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, the only thing I could think of was like walking into a store. And I don't even like purchasing things, but I would walk into a store. Well, ultimately, that led me to go take ice skating lessons in my 50s. So doing something out of your comfort zone. And then the third tool is to take a 20-minute walk every day with no noise in your ears, no podcast, no walking buddy to talk to, just you and the sounds in your head. And so that's another tool that I think can be another set of tools that can be incredibly helpful. And if people haven't read The Artist's Way at Work, on the surface, it may seem kind of woo-woo, but I've been amazed at how many of us with a male, accomplished-oriented mindset find such value and nuggets. And the last thing I'll just say about this is many of us will remember years ago, there was a study that said $75,000 was the amount of money you need to be happy. Anything beyond that doesn't increase happiness. And if you inflation adjust that number, let's call it $150,000 now. But if you're a family of 5 or so and you live in New York, that still could be a bit of a struggle. The researchers behind that study, the original study, teamed up with some folks from Penn, and what they discovered was, that number's wrong, but it's not wrong because of the size of the number. It's wrong because for each one of us, there is some number that enables us to meet all of our core Maslow hierarchy of the needs. But things beyond that will not increase our life satisfaction if we do not have a base of well-being, or what I call emotional wealth. I've had the pleasure or the interest of working for 2 self-made billionaires over the course of my career, both of whom are amazing human beings. But I saw that in the absence of life satisfaction, even that much money
Yep.
didn't
Yeah.
make a difference over the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Last question. You've been so gracious. I could talk to you for hours. What would the middle school Manisha, if you were to meet her right now, and if she were to talk to you, like, what do you think she would say to you right now?
What she would say to me right now?
Yeah, what would middle school say to you today?
Holy F, what a journey. But I also think she would say, boy, looking at you now, I wished you had valued creativity, connection, and curiosity more than you did as you went through your adult life. You would have had more fun. You might have made a bigger imprint on the broader community from a volunteer standpoint. And you probably would still have friends. And maybe a husband too.
Well, I will tell you that you are, look, from the little I know of you, you've written personal finance books for young women professionals. You've gotten this book. I know you speak, you get on this. So you have impacted a lot of people, myself included. So I thank you for that. We'll put all this in the notes, but where is the best place for people to go find you? Obviously, we'll buy the book, MoneyZen. We'll put the link to that. Where else can they go find you? And anything you want to promote?
Really simple. MoneyZen.com is my home base for absolutely everything I do related to this topic.
Awesome. Manisha, what a joy. On behalf of all of our listeners, thank you so much for your time today.
Keith, thank you for the wonderful conversation.